Welcome to the In the Silence podcast. I'm your host, Sandra Payne. As an RN and holistic wellness coach working with nurses, I'm uniquely positioned to hear the struggles, the deep passions, and the stories of nurses, our silent heroes. Many nurses suffer with burnout, depression, anxiety, PTSD, substance abuse, and suicidality, and they do so in silence. Nurses are the ones we turn to for help when we need it the most, and this is a heavy burden for them to carry. This burden, the pervasive bullying and unsupportive culture of our healthcare system, means many nurses have lost their voice. These are their stories. My guest today is Kelly Cronin. Kelly is a registered nurse in Ontario, Canada, with over 25 years of nursing experience. She's practiced in areas such as family medicine, urgent care clinics, the coronary care unit, outpatient cardiology clinics, in the cancer center, and currently works on a palliative care unit. When not working, Kelly likes to invest in her health and wellness and is often found riding her bike, training for her latest bike packing camping adventure. Kelly has used humor to get her through a lot of difficult times, such as the loss of her parents and her baby sister. Kelly also uses humor to help her deal with the challenges that come with working in healthcare, particularly during pandemic times. It's my honor to have Kelly here with us today to share all about how she has created balance and boundaries in this nursing career. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here and to really give you a chance to step up to the mic and share your story. It's been really amazing just to see how this is all unfolded and to really get to know, a very small handful so far of nurses across Canada, but I'm super eager to hear lots of your story. So you can share with us a little bit about yourself, nursing and otherwise, but we'd love to hear, who is Kelly?
Yeah, so I did graduate back in 1996. At that point, there were really no nursing jobs here in Canada. So half of my class went to the States right away. I was fortunate enough to have made connections. I started working at the urgent care clinic as part of a high school co-op in grade 11. And so I was like an assistant to the receptionist. And because of working there for 5 years before I actually graduated, I made connections with different physicians. And so two of the physicians actually went into family medicine practice, and they hired me initially as a receptionist for them. And then I graduated into doing a little bit of nursing there, as well as working at the urgent care clinic as a brand new nurse. So I stayed in the family medicine for 4 years doing nursing and reception. And I loved family medicine because you got to see the same people over and over again. So you got to develop a relationship with them. You got to see their families grow. And that's the part of nursing that I really like, is having that connection with people. The urgent care clinic, it was interesting because it wasn't quite an emergency department. So it wasn't such an adrenaline rush, but anything walked in the doors, heart attacks and, anaphylaxis. And I don't want to say mundane, but the simpler things to deal with, like sore throats and that sort of thing. I've always been fascinated by the heart. My little sister had heart issues. So I was fortunate in 2001 to get a job in the coronary care unit, and I worked there for 3 years. And I only left because they actually closed the coronary care unit down in our hospital. And I was getting married at the time, and my husband was doing shift work, and we knew we wanted to start a family, and we didn't want both of us doing shift work. So I left the cardiac center in 2004 and went back to the urgent care clinic full time until I had my daughter in 2006. And then after my year of maternity leave, I wanted something with a little bit more structured hours. The urgent care clinic, we opened at 8 a.m. We locked the doors at 5, but we could be there till 7 o'clock seeing people. So I did start at the outpatient cardiology center and had a really sweet gig. It was Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I got a lunch pretty much every day, which in nursing, we're not always guaranteed to have our breaks. It was a very comprehensive clinic. So my main job there was focusing on prevention of cardiac risk factors. So whether people already had a heart attack and they were in for secondary risk prevention and management of their risk factors, or they just had a cluster of risk factors cancers, and we were trying to prevent them from getting to that point where they had a heart attack. So that was a really cool, that was like, I sat down one-on-one with people. We looked at all their risk factors. We looked at their lifestyle, their activity, their diet, their blood sugars, their weight. We did all kinds of measurements on them. And it was really fascinating to kind of be able to coach people through doing the things they already knew they needed to do, but just couldn't quite get there.
Yeah.
And then we opened up a cardiac rehab program there. So that was really cool to be involved in that portion of it. And I did that up until 2013. And then I needed a change. So that's when I went to the cancer center. And my role there was very unconventional. It was a program funded by the Ministry of Health and Cancer Care Ontario, and they gave all 14 regional cancer programs in the province funding to do smoking cessation with cancer patients. And when I first started the job, I was like, this is a bit backwards. They already have cancer. Why do they need to quit smoking? And through all of my learning, I realized that the chemicals in the tobacco smoke can actually lower the amount of circulating chemotherapy in their bodies and make their cancer treatment less effective, even radiation. So I did that for 7 years until I got laid off about 15 months ago. And because I'm in the union, I got picked up and plunked into palliative care, which is really kind of interesting because when I graduated nursing 25 years ago, I had had no exposure in my training to palliative care. But I remember saying to myself, Kelly, towards the end of your career, you are going to work in palliative care, and that's how you'll finish off your nursing. And so here I am 25 years in, and I'm doing palliative care and absolutely can't imagine working anywhere else in the hospital. So that's kind of my journey as a nurse so far.
Yeah, that's quite the timeline. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I've done work in cardiac rehab as well. And so just hearing your excitement actually, as you were talking about working with people and looking at all their risk factors. And it's a part of actually the reason that I left my traditional role in nursing. We had really created this robust program for cardiac patients in Northern BC. And when I went on my last mat leave, they axed a whole bunch of the program. And when I came back, it had turned into a very small offering to any patient with any kind of risk factor, even if they've had a heart attack or sitting with any kind of risk that wasn't, substantial, because then they got seen in other ways. But if they had just minor risk, which I don't even know how they stratify that. So they really cut our services. And it was so disappointing to me because we had worked so hard to create, a program that was looking at the holistic person. When I worked in Winnipeg, I worked in cardiac rehab there too. And I worked in a clinic where we developed a program just like we did here that was for people with diabetes. And it just, that kind of work is so rewarding because you're right. It's not like people don't know what to do. It's just that they need some support to get there. And you know what, actually, I feel the same way about, nurses in the work that I'm doing now, because it's not like we're unintelligent people and we don't know how to help ourselves. But sometimes we need some support and we need somebody to help guide us to get us there. I was just resonating with what you were sharing about your history. I love the story too about how you remember saying to yourself, you're going to finish out your career in palliative. And now here you are. And at 25 years, I don't know how many years you have left, but palliative is a really rewarding place to work. I did some work there as a care aide before I graduated nursing. So tell me, in 25 years, I know the bumps that you must have experienced along the road. And I know our listeners would love to, not like we love to hear about struggles, but we do kind of. So we do like to hear about other people's pain and challenges because it connects to our heart, right? So just share with us maybe what's been your biggest struggle as a nurse.
My biggest struggle would be setting boundaries around ensuring that I do the self-care. Because like you said, we know what to do. It's just, we are so trained to put other people's needs ahead of our own that unless we're mindful about it and stop and say, I'm putting everybody else's needs before my own. And that's not okay. We have to have boundaries because employers will never have boundaries. It doesn't matter if you're in healthcare or you work at Tim Hortons or fast food or anything. Employers don't have boundaries. And so we need to know that it's okay to take care of ourselves. And not only is it okay, it's essential, especially this past year. I mean, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and I know she's watching everything that I do. And so it's been a hard year, especially at work. There's days where I just go in the bathroom and cry because I just don't know how much more I can take. And, I think, well, maybe I'll just quit, but I'm a healer through and through. And what else would I do with my life? Nursing is it. And in the past year, even my husband has noticed how much I've grown because I have really stopped and become very mindful and very deliberate in setting aside dedicated time every single day to take care of myself, so that when I'm at home, I can be the best version of me for my husband and daughter. And when I'm at work, I can be the best version of me for my coworkers, the patients, and their families that we serve.
That is such a powerful thing to be able to create that space. I'm curious because I know probably a lot of people listening will have the same kind of story in their head of, well, how do you find the time? Like, if you're working these busy shifts and it's exhausting when you're there and you come home and you're tired and, across the board, I mean, the numbers of nurses that are struggling right now with burnout or worse, depression, anxiety to varying degrees, and where they can't even muster up the motivation, to do the smallest kinds of things for themselves. How did you kind of create this new pattern for yourself, and how do you continue to make it a priority for you?
Well, I actually I don't want to say suffer. I actually thrive with depression. I've had depression since clinically diagnosed since I was in my teens. Both my parents had depression as well. And so I know for me, it's hard to set my alarm at 4:30 a.m. and get up and make sure that I do at least 15 minutes of yoga and have some prayer and quiet time before I start to get ready for work. But I also know that if I don't carve out that time, my mental health is going to suffer, especially during this pandemic. I would say since December, I have committed to myself to doing yoga every single day, even if it's only 10 or 15 minutes. I have found a couple postures that are really good for anxiety. And so I do both of those for 5 minutes every single day before I go to work and at least when I get home. So when I'm out of the home 14 hours a day, I'm at least getting 20 minutes of yoga, sometimes more. I try to get 30 minutes of activity every day, even days where I work. I know that I have to be disciplined. I have to set my alarm at 4:30 and I got to drag myself out of bed and make it happen.
So it really sounds like, it's a mindset. It's making a choice, right? Because it would be easier to just hit the snooze button and sleep for an extra half an hour, or whatever it might be before you have to get up. Yeah, because for some reason, getting up to go to work is more important than getting up to nourish ourselves. So tell me a little bit about the work that you've had to do, because I know my own story with depression, and it's a significant amount of work to pull yourself out of that hole and to stay out of the hole. So maybe just telling us a little bit about how you were able to cultivate this kind of mindset to make yourself a priority and to have this discipline and be really deliberate about what you're doing, knowing that depression can easily sneak back in and take control.
I think first of all, it started with being physically active, doing a lot of cardio. That's kind of where I started. And I practiced what I had preached to my cardiac patients all those years: bare minimum 30 minutes of cardiac activity a day, ideally 45 or 60 minutes, but commit to that half hour. And there were some days I was working out for an hour and a half and 2 hours. And, in the fall, I was still really struggling. I thought, okay, I'm sleeping well. I'm eating a balanced diet. I'm exercising. What is this missing piece? It took me probably a good 6 to 8 months to figure out I wasn't being mindful. 95% of the time we function on autopilot. But when we can stop and be conscious, not in the medical sense where we're alert and oriented, but conscious of the thoughts in my head and the way I choose to spend my energy. And that's where this wise effort comes in. I have a beautiful friend who's a yoga teacher, and he's just this wise, he's like my own personal guru. And one day he said to me, Kelly, what is the foundation of yoga? And I was like, well, it's about postures and breathing. And that's when he looked at me and he said, wise effort. And the example he used is if you have, say, a crystal bracelet made out of crystal chips that are kind of rough and jagged and pokey, if you hold that in your hand with too much effort, you're going to hurt your hand. And if you hold it in your hand so completely relaxed with too little effort, it could fall onto the ground. And so wise effort is it's just holding on just enough that you don't get hurt, but you also don't lose what you have in your hand. And so I actually printed that out and had a beach theme behind it. And I put that on my workstation every day when I go into work so that I can see it when I start to get ramped up. So say somebody was rude to me and I start to, because nurses are not generally respected in the workplace, when I start to feel myself getting worked up, I look at that and I go, is this worth my effort? This is going to take a lot of effort. And then I stop and I breathe and I say, what is worth my effort? Okay, yes, I've got to go and do so-and-so task for my patient in 308. And that's been huge for me, the wise effort. And I see other nurses walk by my workstation. They go, oh, wise effort, what's that? And so I'm sharing it with them and we are evolving together and it brings us closer and it just enhances our teamwork.
I absolutely love that. I am, such a lover of metaphors, and I see how, anytime I use a metaphor to explain something and just how it clicks for people when they're hearing the story and they can visualize something tangible that helps them understand the concept. And I absolutely love that. It's making me feel of being able to turn it off, being able to disconnect and say what's important for me here. And I think it really ties back to what you were saying about setting boundaries, because that is a boundary. If someone hurt you in some way or offended you or just been rude in passing for no reason whatsoever, it's is this important to me? Is this valuable to me? Is this where I really want to spend my energy? And then making a choice from that place. Tell me a little bit more about what you consider mindful. What does that mean to you and how do you practice it?
Here's a really good example. How many times have we driven somewhere and we're on such autopilot that when we get to our destination, we think, holy crap, was there a stop sign? Did I stop at that red light? Because our minds are so busy and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how brains function, is all these thoughts. And there's so much stimulation, things we're seeing and hearing and sensing and smelling. And there's just so much to take in, but to really just stop and be mindful and just quiet down the busyness, even just for a short period of time. Meditation has been huge for me in helping me with that. I started meditating when I started doing energy work, therapeutic touch, a couple of years ago. And through meditation, which people think, oh, it's about sitting quietly and having no thoughts. No, that's impossible. Our brains are never without thought. But just as things come in, just acknowledging and releasing. And through meditation now on my drives to and from work, I'm noticing things that I've never noticed before. And I've been doing this drive down the same highway for 17 years since I've lived out of town. And I think, was that barn always there? I was just so mindless in my travels that being mindful helps you notice not only things in your surroundings, but even the thoughts that you have to yourself, the way you talk to yourself, the way you can work yourself up, or the way you can calm yourself down. It's really, really important to be mindful.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of a lot of things, also listening, but it connects so many different pieces inside of me, just hearing people share their own experiences. I often think of our world is so neck up, we're so stuck in our heads and we don't even know it. That's the problem, is that we're stuck up here, but we don't even know it. And so much of the work that I've done personally for myself and my own healing journey, through my own depression, and that I share with others, in particular nurses now, is about, reconnecting with the rest of yourself, reconnecting with your body and with your feelings and with your thoughts, and becoming so much more aware of your full experience presence versus just, this running madness that goes on in our minds. And, what I find is I feel when we are really living in that, sort of cerebral state where we're just constantly with this running narrative upstairs that half the time we're not even, we don't even know that is going on. It creates so much anxiety for us. And then, if we sit and we're like ruminating about the past and we're like wishing and we're, running through every single thing that happened that day and beating ourselves up or criticizing or judging ourselves for how that went, that really, in my opinion, really contributes to the depression. And so what I found is, and what I teach is about coming back to the present, because this is where your life is. This is where life is happening right now. And just that whole concept of being present and mindful and, using practices like your breath and engaging in all your senses, it seems so fluffy. I think that it seems like, how is that going to make any difference when I'm overworked? I'm so stressed out. I'm so burnt out. How is this 5 minutes of using my senses going to help me? And I have to tell people, like, you just have to trust me. You just have to trust me, because I've been where you've been. And I'm telling you, it does work, because I've also been where you're saying, like, this stuff's not going to help. We need some kind of magic pill or some kind of switch that some magic doctor knows how to turn. And that's not the case. If we want to create this real healing and have the balance and the peace and the joy that we want for our life, it takes work. It takes a lot of work, consistent, deliberate effort. And I don't mean effort as in like physical, but space effort, like creating the time and space, right?
Absolutely.
I feel like we could talk forever. Actually, like your story, I'm like, holy man, like she's like my soul sister here, and we've just met. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your career in nursing and, what's been some of your biggest achievements?
I think for me, a big part of how I practice nursing is, you can look at it two ways. I was fortunate enough to watch nurses and doctors and all kinds of healthcare providers care for my mom and my sister. But the benefit is that being a family member of somebody who's terminally ill, I bring that compassion to my job. So palliative care, the unit I work on is actually the unit my mom passed away on almost 8 years ago. And a lot of the nursing staff I work with took care of my mom. And I just feel it's such an honor to be with patients and their families at such a finite time, because we know the end is coming for them. And so just being able to get to know my patients, what made them tick when they had a healthy life, and how I can maybe bring some joy to their final days, which may sound weird, joy in a palliative care unit, but there is lots of reasons to be joyful.
How have you experienced working in that area during the pandemic? Because, I know we see and we hear about long-term care areas where visitation has been limited and people have been dying alone. I can imagine this might be a bit of a sensitive thing to talk about, but I'm curious what it's like working in this area during this really kind of extraordinary time of extreme isolation for people.
Yeah, at the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't allowing any visitors. So it was really hard. People were dying without their loved ones at their side. We tried to arrange Zoom calls and stuff, but that's just not the same. And having had the honor and privilege of sitting beside my mom and my sister in their final days and hours and minutes, it was really heartbreaking, not just for myself, but all the staff. It was heartbreaking to know what these patients and their families were going through. Thankfully, restrictions did lighten up because of the nature of our unit. And it's still not a free-for-all, but they are allowed daily visits for a couple of hours with a couple of people every day. We are limiting the flow of people, so we don't want everybody and their brother coming in, but immediate family and people who are really important to the patient are being able to come in. Now, having said that, some family just aren't in a space where they want to be there in those final moments. And there's lots of people who I've just sat at their bedside holding their hand, just me and the patient, until they take their last breaths, because I don't want them to be alone.
And tell me, Kelly, how much does your practices of self-care and really nourishing yourself, how much does it help you to process? Like, I know it's not tragic because we know it's coming, but it is, right? Like, it's deeply emotional. And so
Yeah.
how much do your practices really, help you to create balance and be able to not be carrying this stuff with you, because it's triggering and it's emotional?
Yeah. Without my self-care practice, I'm sure I'd be just a hot mess. Because I mean, we're human, right? And I always say, Kelly, the day you stop crying because of a loss is the day you actually need to leave palliative care. But there's a time and a place. And so when somebody is passing or they've just passed, all my self-care helps me show up as the best version of my nursing self so that I can be strong and be a support to the person passing and their loved ones who are in the room. When they leave, do I go into the back office and cry? Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I do. And that's okay, because I was strong and there for my patient and their family when they needed me. And then I have a moment to kind of release some of that emotion. My colleagues I'd be lost without them. We really kind of debrief with each other sometimes, because we do see some pretty crazy things, and we actually do the medical assistance in dying on our unit. And that can be really hard to wrap your head around when you have somebody who's talking and joking and carrying on like themselves one moment, and then the next minute they're gone. And that can be really hard to process. And then the flip side is there's somebody else waiting for that bed then. And so we don't really have a lot of time to process it before we're getting the next admission. That's the hardest part. We really struggle with that.
What kind of tools do you guys or practices do you use to help you process? I mean, if you don't have the time in the moment, and I'm just thinking about some of the people that might be listening who are working in, really intense areas where you're in the middle of something that's extremely traumatic, and then you got to just boom, go to the next thing. Like, there's no time, there's no space for that humanness. Right? So what kind of strategies have you guys come up with to really help yourselves move through that instead of just kind of stuffing it down and moving on to the next patient?
Yeah, that's so hard. A couple of things that I do kind of on a daily basis for myself is I have certain playlists with certain music that I've created intentionally just for my drive to work and then my drive home from work. Because in my car, I have like 22 minutes from when I leave the hospital to when I get home that I use as my debriefing time. So sometimes I'm singing my brains out just to release whatever. I've been known to throw dance parties in the break room. I mean, with COVID, you're only allowed one other person in the break room. But yeah, I've put on a playlist and told whoever's there having their break with me, like, let's get up and dance this out. Like, we just need something to make us smile, something to give us the silly reason to giggle because we're dancing like idiots in the break room, or sometimes we cry. Sometimes we just hold one another and cry, because what else do you do? But then that self-care when I get home is huge. Me taking the time to be quiet and do my yoga and acknowledge the feels that I've had and not judge myself for having them, but realizing I'm having them because it's coming from a place of compassion.
Yeah, I have this vision of nursing units where, as we are coming on and off of shift, that we just have these dance parties together to process the stress, because dancing is so powerful for us. When I finally heard an explanation for why, it just hit home. And, a part of it is when we're traumatized or when something has happened, for those people that are listening that maybe, only relate trauma to like these big incidents, that trauma is not necessarily about the situation. It's about the energetic and the emotional reaction that you have inside of you, and like the neurological and the chemical reaction too that happens inside your body. If we just immediately go on to the next patient and we don't make space to process that energy gets stuck inside of us. And so dancing and like hugging your friends and crying together and talking about it, what that does is it sends a signal to your body that everything is okay, that you're safe, that the incident is over, like that you can complete this cycle and let it go. Otherwise, it gets stuck. And so I have this vision of you guys dancing in your break room. And it makes me so happy that that's happening, because I just know how much of an impact that would have on you and the other person who are taking the time to just dance silly and laugh, and how much your body would thank you for that. And then also hearing, the impact of your self-care practices and consciously creating that space for yourself to move through the feelings that existed or that showed up for you during that day. I think it just sounds like such a really well balanced and well-rounded structure you've created for yourself. I'm curious if you could give, because I guarantee you there are people that are listening who are really stuck and who maybe feel hopeless, like, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what to do. You said you started by working out. They're like thinking, I don't have 30 minutes to work out. I have no energy to work out. What would be some of the advice that maybe you could give to some of these nurses who are listening, and, maybe even keeping yourself as a younger version in mind, and knowing what you went through?
Yeah, this comes back to the old cardiac rehab, setting SMART goals, something that's specific. So, for example, I'm going to go for a walk and make it measurable. I'm only going to go for 10 minutes because that's attainable and that's realistic. And the time frame, right? We can't go from not moving our bodies to moving them an hour a day. But if we start slow and realistic, but we just stay committed, it grows. I tell my 15-year-old all the time, I want you to exercise. Not for, any specific reason, but I guess it is a specific reason, because I always ask her to be very mindful. How do you feel mentally before you get on the bike? She has a lot of anxiety, so we have all kinds of exercise equipment in her basement, but she likes to ride the spin bike. So I'll ask her, please pay attention. How do you feel before you get on the bike? And then when she gets off, and she doesn't exercise long, maybe 10, 15 minutes, but I'll say, how do you feel now? She's always got a smile on her face, because that activity releases feel-good hormones. And the more you feel good, the more you want to do the thing that made you feel good. And so it's a very natural evolution. Once you just get committed, start small, and just watch it grow.
I love that you're saying that, because this week I've talked with 4 different groups of nurses for Nurses Week. And that's a big part of what I was talking about, is we have all of these things that we know we could do, we know we should do, that would help us. Like, it's not for a lack of knowledge. So we know that we could do these things, but yet we're not doing them. And sometimes it's because we feel like we need to do it all or nothing. And so if we could just take one step in the right direction, where we feel like super confident that we can achieve this thing, like you're saying, I'm going to go for a walk. Maybe I'm going to go for a walk once a week for 20 minutes, like that. I feel like that's really doable. I can fit that in. And then we start there. And you're right. It grows, the motivation, the drive, and the empowerment that comes when we show up for ourselves, when we make a commitment to say, I'm going to do this for me. And then we actually do it. It creates this whole ripple effect inside of us. And so, even though some of the steps that are so realistic and achievable seem kind of like they're too easy to make any kind of difference, over time, they make a massive difference, because before you know it, you've created significant change, and it was all just one small step at a time, right? As you were sharing the story about your daughter, I was thinking about something my mom we were talking about sex, actually, and actually it was a girlfriend story, and we were relating it to going to the gym, and it was like, you don't really want to. It's not, you kind of have to talk yourself into doing it. But once you do it, it feels great, right? So it's just like, I guess it can apply to any kind of change that we're trying to do, especially like if I tell you to do something, that's not the best place to start. The best place to start is something that you want to do, because then it will create this really, significant ripple inside of you that it motivates you to do more, because it'll feel amazing. It'll feel so good. If you could share with us what have been, the most helpful supports and the most helpful tools that you have found in your own journey to help you deal with stress and the overwhelm of nursing, but also, of just being a woman in our world.
Oh, humor. Humor has got me through so much. So I'm 47 now. When I was 22, my dad died by taking his own life. And then there were four of us left, my three sisters and my mom. And then my mom got lung cancer and she was sick for 10 years. And my baby sister was ill from birth. She had a very rare disease that's only affected 400 families or so in the world. And she wasn't supposed to live to see her first birthday, and she made it to 38. But there was a lot of bumps on her road. She was really, really sick. And so her and my mom passed within 2 years of each other. So it's just me and one sister left. And I can honestly say, without a sense of humor, I don't think that I'd still be standing or that I'd be coping with all of this loss as well as I have. Even to the point where I'm working on the unit where my mom passed. Humor has been huge. Sometimes it's inappropriate humor. Through grief, I used a lot of humor to get through the initial shock. And I use a lot of humor just in my everyday at work. I have this beautiful example. It was such a sweet moment at work. I had this lady with dementia who was always trying to escape. So I had her in a wheelchair by the nurse's station, and I had the brakes on the wheelchair, but she would shuffle pretty darn good. And she could shuffle right across the length of the unit. And so then I'd say, okay, let's go back to the starting line. And I'd put the brakes on the wheelchair again. And so I played the song, The Cupid Shuffle, to her. And I was singing and I was dancing to it. And she just looked at me and she burst out laughing, thinking, what the hell are you doing? But we just shared this moment of totally ridiculous humor. It kind of helped my frustration because I was getting frustrated trying to keep bringing her back and roping her in while taking care of my other patients. But that was a lot of fun, just playing the Cupid Shuffle and just dancing. Calm me right down.
I couldn't agree with you more how powerful humor is. In one of the groups that I work with of nurses, we had a humor coach come. Her name is Pasha Marlowe, and I'll put her link in the show notes. But she came and spoke to us, and we did like a bunch of kind of improv games, and one of them that we played was Would You Rather, and lesson to her: don't play Would You Rather with a group of nurses, because I can guarantee I can guarantee you're going to be traumatized. And I'm pretty sure we did a little bit, but part of her story is how she used humor to move through the difficulties that she has an ill child who's chronically ill every single day. And you can go to her site and read her story. She's very open with it, but she's used humor to help her cope and get through. And actually, in a lot of studies and things I've read about nurses and resiliency, is that humor is one of our sort of natural innate tools that we can use to help us get through. And you're right, sometimes it's a little bit borderline professional and borderline not. But if it helps us get through and it's not hurting anyone, then I think it's so important. There's another, client of mine, and she was sharing that they were she works in palliative care also, and they were having a really tough shift, and she came across some stupid little, comic meme, and she shared it with everybody at the, in her colleagues on the night shift, and they all just laughed and laughed and laughed until they were crying. And then that moment where you switch from this is so funny, but it's not funny, and then now I'm hysterically crying because all the emotion is coming to the surface. So I think those moments are so powerful. And like, to share that with your colleagues or with people that you feel safe and trusted with, it seems like, just a kind of a normal, kind of mundane, maybe even thing to go through. Like, well, whatever, we laughed and we cried. But actually that does such a really beautiful thing to our physical body, but also our mental and our emotional, our spiritual body, to have those kinds of experiences. So I really appreciate that you're bringing up humor as a tool, because I think we kind of dismiss it. I just want to share one more story. This Mother's Day, I haven't seen my mom, and this is, seems kind of, what's the word? Well, I guess I could say shameful to even say this to you because you've lost your mom. I haven't seen mine in 9 months. She is still alive, and she only lives, she lives in the same province, but I haven't seen her. And I was feeling kind of sorry for myself and kind of depressed, and just really noticing I was getting irritable, and I just wanted to kind of isolate and disconnect from people on a day that, I was supposed to be with my family and celebrating me and as a mom. But I said to my husband,
texted him when I was putting the kids to bed and I said, I find a funny movie because I need to laugh. And I found the movie Bad Moms. I don't know if you've ever watched it, but
oh my gosh, yes.
It's so funny. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I laughed, and I had that moment where I laughed and laughed and laughed. And then I was like, here it comes. And I was crying because, and I know I'm not the only one that has those moments, but they're really cathartic, actually, just to let go of some of that pent up pain that we have inside of us. So yeah, anyways, and I'm sure you have tons of stories too that maybe, do you want to share with us one more story about how you've used humor to help you through a difficult time?
Oh my gosh. There's this time after my sister passed, and because she had been so sick, her apartment was like a mini hospital. She had like feeding tube at night, so she had a pole, right? And so a bunch of us are there, we're trying to clean up her apartment and take equipment back to where it belongs. And anyway, of course, we were dancing because that's what I do. I had the music on, I was dancing, and it was a small little apartment. It got really hot, so I ripped off my shirt and I went running across the floor, hopped on the feeding tube pole, and just kept going across the floor, and everybody just burst out laughing. And my cousin, who was really close with my sister, she was laughing so hard, and then she just looked at me and she said, "Thank you so much for making me laugh in such a difficult moment where we're packing up all of Angie's stuff." And was it inappropriate? Probably, absolutely. But did we all laugh, and did it help us carry on and do the tasks that we needed to do? Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know that we need to carry that heaviness with us, right? Like, I think the inappropriateness that some people might feel is, maybe that's just stemming from some kind of belief that they have. But if it makes you feel good, it can't be wrong. If you're not hurting anyone and it helps to lighten what you're feeling inside, then it can't be wrong. That's just, as simple as I could put it. I would love to just exchange stories of how humor has helped. I really appreciate everything that you've been sharing with us, just from mindfulness and creating this deliberate structure for yourself and setting boundaries and allowing yourself to be prioritized and to lean into what your needs are. And, with self-care and with using humor and this whole concept of wise effort. Just really so much that you've shared with us, and so helpful on so many levels. So I really want to honor you for being here. I know it's not a small thing to step up to the mic and share your story. So I just really want to express all my gratitude for you for being here and for being so open and vulnerable with us, and just give you one last opportunity if you have anything else that you'd like to share with us.
I just want to thank you for giving me this platform. I think as nurses, we need to be there for each other and just share different ways that we get through our days and survive the work that we do on an every day, not just during a pandemic. But I think, together we are stronger, and it's okay to be vulnerable because that's what makes us human.
Thank you, Kelly. I just really love to end on that note. Together we are stronger. And when we can come together and we can open up and share our stories and be real with each other, as I kind of say, lay down your swords, drop your armor, be a real person. And that kind of authentic connection is what provides significant healing for us all. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I personally want to thank you for taking your time to listen to this podcast. It is my truest honor to sit with these nurses and witness them tell parts of their story. We as human beings have a deep need to be seen and heard, and this is my way of helping nurses in particular find their voice. Please know that the opinions shared in this podcast are those of the individual sharing them and not a reflection of any employer or regulatory body. We are sharing our truth, and that may not always resonate with you. But I'm guessing if you're listening, that something has rung true for you in this podcast. Our stories offer healing and create connection, two things that we as nurses need as we navigate the jungle of a healthcare career. So thank you for being witness. And if you feel inclined to reach out to the guest on today's episode to offer validation and appreciation, you can always find their contact in the show notes, as well as other links to the offerings of Sandra Payne Wellness. If you'd like to be a part of the community, join our private Facebook group, Surviving Nursing. And if you'd like to share your story on the End the Silence podcast, be sure to reach out. When we can come out of the shadows and into our light, we can create the change that is needed. And when we do this work together, we are so much stronger. Thank you for listening.